Okay, this is the third lecture. This is the sophist and what sophistry is. Please understand, this will be the first part of the course where we're actually going to start learning how to think and how we need to prepare ourselves to make knowledgeable answers. Okay? Please remember this. And the first thing you need to remember is again, we have Sophia, is where the word sophist comes from. It means wisdom, as we learned earlier. And these fellows were supposed to be the wise guys, and therefore they'd be your go to people if you want to have your child educated or if you want to have the community educated. These originally started out as basically kind of an itinerant sort of preacher, not preacher, teacher, going through telling you these are the lessons you should have. They would be teaching logic and rhetoric, of course. But by definition, the word sophist is wise guy. And we're definitely not talking about, as we see here, good fellows. Uh, these are your go-to guys. These are the people that you wanted to have come in and keep the community ready, keep them bright, keep them involved in what's going on around them. Now, the key issues that we need to know about the sophist is they're not concerned about the universe. There's no more of this cosmogony problem. That problem that's the pre-Socratics. We don't need that. It is not functional in what they considered their daily life. Their work is primarily to be persuasive when they spoke. So they were the first people to start teaching people that you can alter words. You can change the meaning of a word. You can start to play off fears. You can start to play off of things that you can get. How I can help you. It's all about persuasion, all right? The persuasive speech was designed to cause people to believe what the speaker is saying. We have to remember the word believe. Believe is going to appear multiple times throughout the rest of this course. It is intended to create arguments to determine power and arguments about power. So what is power? Uh, the ruling class. Well, how do they maintain being the ruling class? How am I going to do this? These guys are sort of going to be a precursor, as you'll hear in this the social political world of philosophy in particular, which is what we will cover, is you'll see some of this come out in Machiavelli, even though we're not reading it. Um, these similar items of how do I maintain political power? How do I keep people in control? What should I tell people? These sorts of things become very important at this time. A modern sophist, if you wanted to compare them to something, would be a partisan speaker on a subject. Okay, one of my favorite examples to use is Ancient Aliens. My gosh, they have great, wonderful, persuasive arguments, and all the way down to the end of it. But you have to be able to accept their answer. They, they make a very good rhetorical argument. They make a very good, believable argument. But there's a leap of faith that you have to make in there, an emotional choice, or maybe you strongly believe in this thing, in this topic. But is it correct? Is it empirical? This is what the sophists are kind of, they're a little more relative on. It's more of a utilitarian, the means to the end for them. Truth was never as important. Plato and Aristotle did not think highly of these people, and they have, even though they do have a value in our modern society, we should look at these gentlemen and think of what they had done. Uh, they will come out and claim to be skeptics. The core concepts of ancient skepticism are belief, suspension of judgment, criterion of truth, appearance, and investigation. This is different from modern skepticism, but there are some correlations. We'll get into this a little bit later. There's a doxastic attitude that are epistemic, pertaining to knowledge, cognitive. These can be as simple as belief, attitudes to which a person holds towards a proposition, okay? Uh, you have to understand the attitudes of the time. We have gone past trying to find out the universe. Now we're establishing city-states. We're encountering other empires, other city policies. These are going to alter what is truly important. The first guy to come up is Protagoras. He taught that the best way to achieve success was from careful and prudent acceptance of traditional customs. Not because they're necessarily true, but manipulating these very facts, these past beliefs, these past historical events. If you manipulate them, these can be useful tools in the political arena. Again, this transfers well into our modern world. For him, it's homo mensura. That is, that man is the measure of all things, of things that they are, and of things that are not, that they are not. All things are to be compared to man. Uh, the height of an animal, the whether an animal is considered smart, whether it is a living thing or a non-living thing. And you use man. This is going to come back to us when we start talking about Plato. He believed that in relativism, he believed that relativity was important to Sophism. The doctrine that knowledge, truth, and morality exist in relation to culture, society, or context, or historical context, are not absolute. That means that things can alter from place to place, from time to time, from day to day. Um, Relativism allows you to change your position, change your point of view, depending on where you're at, what you're doing. A lot of relativism leads to ambiguity, and with ambiguity, you have no truth. You have nothing but very thin screens of what you're trying to say. Uh, One of the simple sayings, normally in these type of relativistic situations, the center will never hold. After him comes Gorgias. He was a Sicilian philosopher, orator, and a rhetorician. He's considered by many scholars to be one of the founders of Sophism, a movement traditionally associated with philosophy that emphasizes the practical application of rhetoric towards civic and political life. So he's using persuasive speech, particularly for the advance of the society and political power. This is almost what we would call the beginning of social political philosophy. Like other Sophists, he was an itinerant. He practiced in various cities. He gave public exhibitions of his skill at the great Panhellenic centers of Olympia and Delphi. He charged cash for you to come see him talk. Uh, so he would come into a town, he'd gather up an audience, take a fee, speak on a subject or two, and then he would start taking questions from the audience. Uh, this allows him to get a feel for what's going on in the city, uh, how he can draw it back into his regular life, how this works with him. But the key is, and a lot of people you need to remember, I'm teaching you how to think. Is everything he's saying true? Did he not just say this in the last city he was working for? Or did he say something opposite in the last city that they shouldn't be doing? Again, the relativism and where you are in society and where you are in Greece, the ideas are going to vary. He believed that there is no absolute form of arete, or excellence or virtue, and everything is relative to the situation. Again, you have the idea of that there is not excellence. Well, if there is not excellent, if there is not an absolute, what are we striving for? It seems like all of this, particularly the relativism, allows you to look into this and find a difference, something that you can see. Well, I can relate to that. This is relative to what I'm doing. Whether or not it has any type of semiotic solution to this or semiotic connection. We'll get into the word semiotic. They're not similar. Things that look similar many times are not similar and are actually more different than apples and oranges. You have a citrus fruit and a different type of fruit. On non-existence, simply stated, he believed nothing exists, And even if something existed, nothing can be known about it. And even if something can be known about it, knowledge about it cannot be communicated to others. And then, even if we could communicate it to others, it could not be understood by those people. So, what you have here is just a simple way of saying that nothing can be known. We are in nothingness. And remember, these guys have quit chasing this idea of truth and finding out the cosmology of the universe. To now they're trying to maintain power. If you have this belief system, it's very easy to do, as we call in the modern political arena, flip-flop on things. You're going to hear more about this non-existence later on when we get to Plato. He was not well received by Plato because of his positions on rhetoric. Plato distinguishes between philosophy and rhetoric, characterizing Gorgias as a shallow, opportunistic orator who entertains his audience with eloquent words and who believes that it is unnecessary to learn the truth about actual matters when one has discovered the art of persuasion. Uh, Everybody had that friend in high school. Again, I'm a Gen Xer, I'm older. Uh, we have a very different view of the universe, but you should be able to talk your way out of things. And this is one of the skills. Or talk your way into something. Plato didn't see this as a value of rhetoric. Rhetoric should be used to offer great and magnificent points that can be absolute. This is going to stick around, this idea of persuasion and what you can do. And in the 19th century, writers such as George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel will re-examine the persuasive rhetoric of Gorgias and apply that relativism to a win at all costs, no matter the truth arguments. This will be Hegel's dialectic. We'll get into that much later in the semester. So, but just remember, again, when people tell you you don't need to know the ancients, look at them and say, but it's all based out of this somewhere, somehow. Let's go through the genealogy of these thoughts. And the only way to do that is to actually read these guys, to actually learn of these guys. And, they're old. It sounds boring, but it's fine. It's something you can understand. We have Thrasymachus. His name will come up when we read Republic. And it was simply for him that might makes right. Power. It's all about power. He would have, of course, Foucault would feel this way too. He was known for saying things such as, justice is nothing other than the advantage of the stronger. Socrates' injustice on a sufficiently large scale is stronger, freer, and more masterful thing than justice. And as I said in the beginning, it is the advantage of the stronger that the just, while the unjust, that is the just, while the unjust is what profits man's self and is for his advantage. So both of these sentences, both of these statements state very clearly that strength is the advantage. Might makes right. We examine, like I said, a little later, and the idea of justice. We have a very different understanding of what justice is today. In fact, I stick with a very old form of justice, and that it comes straight from Plato, because it's the easiest one. Justice is doing what is correct for society. That is, doing your thing. You do your thing to the best of your ability. That way you perform justly to society. If you're a shoemaker, you make the best shoes. If you're a teacher, you teach the best. And you teach as well as you can. And you teach, again, how to do things. Not what to do. How to think. How to be a good leader. How to be a good writer. How to be a good mathematician. These are very important points. Again, lost in 2,500 years of education through multitudes of ups and downs in Western civilization. Justice is not a relative term that should be changed around day to day. Callicles and Critias, both of these guys denounced the virtue of justice, dikasone, as an artificial break on self-interest, a fraud to be seen through by intelligent people. Again, justice is not good for self-interest. We can have multiple arguments about this, but At this point in time, again, it's a 100 level introduction to philosophy course. This would be more of an ethics question, but we need to keep this in mind that we're going to have to worry about self-interest, which is going to come up. Thrasymachus and Callicles have fallen into the folk mythology of immoral philosophy as the immoralist. Uh, this will eventually become what we see now as moral psychology in the 21st century. And for me, and I very rarely editorialize like this, uh, I've done a lot of work in metaphysics. I've my Heidegger, my Nietzsche, everything. I just see that you're going to continually encounter this metaphysics, and how sometimes metaphysics is just as crazy as saying that astrology is a fundamental science. A lot of things you just can't prove. And this is my argument against moral psychology. But again, we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We will examine this in full again later in the semester. But it has its starts right here. Callicles poses an immoralist argument that consisted of four very basic parts. It's a critique of conventional justice, a positive account of justice according to nature, a theory of virtues, and then a hedonistic conception of the good. Ah, now, yes, what are these? Well, there are four parts to his argument. And the reason is we're going to continue on this argument of justice. Okay, all right. He supports the ruling of strong individuals and criticizes the weak because he believes the weak is trying to undermine them. He views democracy as simply a tyranny of the many over the exceptional individual or individuals. He stresses that citizens should allow themselves to be ruled by strong individuals. As you can see, Callicles is not a fancier of democracy. Neither would Plato be. They would see these as a tyranny of the masses, a tyranny of the unfit, um, a tyranny of the poor. But we don't have these kind of class names at this point in time. But this is what this will evolve to, particularly under guys like Hegel and Marx and most of your late postmodernists. But is it wrong to be ruled by an individual and hand them the opportunity? It's happened many times throughout Western civilization with kings, dictators. Men like Stalin and Hitler do not rise to power unless, they're given an opportunity. Just in the same vein, though, you don't get good kings and queens and good world leaders, individuals uh, such as Peter the Great, men that expanded. Everybody's going to do things wrong. But is it okay to be ruled by these strong individuals? And it would be all right, but we have to worry about tyranny at all times. Callicles cites nature, saying nature shows that this is what justice has been decided to be. The superior rule the inferior and have a greater share than they. Callicles stresses the superior individuals should be the one to rule. This will be taken again to very bad places in the 19th century under the German idealists, and what would become known as the pseudoscience of anthropology and eugenics. Callicles states that these superior figures must possess intelligence, particularly about the affairs of the city, and courage. There is no need for them to have virtues of justice or moderation, as they're not important like the aforementioned values. Uh, you must know what is going on. Intelligence and then experience and knowledge combined creates wisdom. That's what you're going to need. Uh, you have to have courage because making harsh decisions takes a lot of courage. Okay. Callicles rejects Socrates' ideas of more eating and drinking, but it appears that he does not really know what it is that the superior people deserve more of over the inferior people. More of what is not known or arrived at, but they should, in the least, be held in higher regard. Uh, a big problem of power is that when you get a lot of power, you tend to start taking things that you really do not need. Um, Overabundance. I'm a Lockean guy. I like the idea of life, liberty, pursuit of property. But even Locke says you can have as much property as what you want as long as it does not hurt the others. So you have a maximum there. You can have a maximum amount of apples as long as your ownership of apples is not hurting others. They don't have an idea of what you deserve more of. But if we simply state higher regard, higher regard is another one of these relative things because your regard for somebody can change from action to action. Note the continual affection with relativism. Critias, he was the most horrific of the 30 tyrants who overthrew the Athenian democracy and established the oligarchical dictatorship. It was simply an alliance of elites to rule the lower classes in Athens. Uh, he encourages rulers to use fear, non-existent threats, gods, and unseen, because unseen fears are difficult to prove. If you can say the gods are going to be displeased, if you can take an action and say the reason we had this horrible storm is because the gods are displeased, or if you have a case of plague coming through, this is a by God we're doing this, or they have done this, we have been encircled by a demon or something. These are important things to remember because one of the key aspects of really good sophistry is the use of fear. He was a very greedy man. After Athens fell to Sparta as one of the 30 tyrants, he simply went out and blacklisted many of the other prominent citizens. He shut them down. He did not allow them to speak. He threw them in prison. He would ostracize them. Most of his prisoners were executed, and he took their wealth. He confiscated what they owned. This is similar to what Stalin and Hitler would do in the 20th century. It is a very common practice in the ancient and Middle Ages when people would start, if you conquered somebody's land, you also conquered their treasury. Uh, Critias also asserted that a shrewd and clever-minded man invented for mortals a fear of the gods so that there might be a deterrent to just do bad. The idea of the gods watching you and making sure you're doing good, that's a good thing. This has evolved into, you hear the off-cuff discussions of Big Brother being observed all the time, having everything you're doing watched, not by a god this time, but is by the ruling class. Is that a good thing? To have everything that you're thinking and saying edited. This is the same problem here. He just simply took these people out of society. The Nazis did it. Stalin did it. Many people, the French monarchy, the Bourbons were well known for doing this. The Russian monarchy, the Romanovs, the Hohenzollerns, the Habsburgs, all of these, you would remove these characters so that they could not come back. The last thing you need is a guy coming back and telling you that, and starting a revolution. Critias was killed in a battle near Piraeus. A band of pro-democracy Athenian exiles led by Thesibulus against members of and supporters of the 30. Now remember, he was one of the 30 despots, and they had a battle with some against pro-democracy Athenian exiles. Okay, when we say democracy, that means anybody who is a citizen of Athens was allowed to vote. That doesn't mean that it was everybody in Athens. So got to keep that little piece in there because that democracy is more republic oriented. And of course, he pulled in all of his allies. There was a battle, and he perished. Sophistry had devolved from persuasive rhetoric to subjectivism, skepticism, and nihilism. Nothing of value remained from the pre-Socratics. It wasn't truth anymore. It was about maintaining power and gaining power. The truth is a relative thing. The truth has now become utilitarian. It's a means to an end, or it's just something to be completely disregarded. Uh, It degenerated so far from its original position that it was constantly changing, altering how words and language were defined in short order. Conversations about what is and what isn't, conversations of where we are. These are important things to remember because prior to the three gentlemen to the left here, Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle, we have a Greece that's been fighting with itself uh, after this wonderful search for what is the universe, what is truth. We're down to how do I maintain power? Power is important. And we all heard the adage, absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. The thought process of Western civilization had once again been objected from its duty of truth and reason by the objects of emotion and power. Emotion rarely creates a decision that is made logically and that is made rationally. Soren Kierkegaard even states that faith will block reason, and these you have to have faith in these. So where are we at prior to going into our look at Socrates? Greece has, up to this time, it's began to expand. It's establishing colonies across the Mediterranean. They have embraced power. They've formed small little city-states, each city-state sending out a group of people. So there's no true Greek state, but there are Greek city-states. And when you have a group of city-states of a large group, you're going to be able to pick and choose certain groups and play them off one another. This is exactly what the Persians are going to be doing in the 4th century BCE. They are going to play the Greek city-states off against each other. And the only way the Greek does manage to defeat the Spartans, does manage to defeat the Persians, is through finally putting away all of this rhetoric and examining the logical situation that they have to come together and fight an outside evil, and that the power and the rhetoric and the relativism is no longer stronger than the approaching evil that is literally right across the ocean, right across the strait there in Turkey. So next time we're going to break into the Socrates, and we might get into a little bit of Aristotle, Plato and Aristotle. I don't know. It depends on how the lecture goes. Until then, have a great day.